Lawyers of Reddit, what was your whole IT moment where you knew you would win? Not a lawyer, but got robbed at gunpoint in my home. Long story short, he would have gone to prison anyway, but the kicker is that the shoes he wore to court were the same shoes he stole from my house. Judge asked if I wanted them back. I said yes. Judge made him take them off in court and walk back in socks. Donated the shoes. It was more about the principle. We had some huge issues with the landlord, trying to enter without letting us know beforehand. Not answering to fix issues. Very aggressive when talking with us. When he decided to sell the place, he didn't check with us about the visits and just showed up randomly with potential buyers. We told him to get lost. He eventually left but called us the same evening to threaten us. We sent emails to remind him of our rights as tenants and he answered by threatening us some more. In an email. We eventually end up in a small issues court, not from the US. Don't know the name, and he fabricates a story about how we are terrible tenants and we try to discourage buyers. We just showed the judge the emails as well as the open complaint to the police we filled a few days earlier. The judge couldn't believe it and gave him a formal warning. Gave us 3 free months of rent. In the end, the guy just used a real estate company to sell the place. I had a client charged with battery. The alleged victim didn't really support the prosecution's case and in any event was reluctant to testify. They still had another witness though. And she said that my client was hitting the alleged victim. So it wasn't looking great. The prosecutor and I were talking before court started. Hanging out by the courtroom doors. When the witness walked in, she looked right at my client, who was sitting not 5 feet from me. Then scanned the room and said, "Where is client name?" The prosecutor and I looked at each other for a minute. And then he said he needed to check on something. When I saw him a few minutes later, my client was riding his motorcycle on a relatively calm street when this guy exited his garage without looking and run over him. In deposition, the guy brought a witness that was with him on the passenger's seat. The whole time, the witness maintained that my client was driving too fast and that there was no time to brake the car. I asked him the same question a few times in different ways, making him tell the story again. In the 4th telling, he, already a bit frustrated, let it slip. "Look, I've already told you. We were exiting the garage and as soon as I lifted up from getting my cell phone on the car's carpet, wait. So you didn't even see the crash? There was no coming back from that." Parent termination case I was prosecuting. Dad went on how he has changed his life around and worked the AA program. Asked him what step he was on. And he proudly proclaimed 3. Asked him what step 3 is. He had no idea. Then asked him step 2 was. Again. No idea. Parental rights terminated. When the petitioner's attorney called me my brother's name when I was on the stand. My brother is a bag and I don't associate with him anymore. But dude has a lengthy criminal history and it pops up on traffic stops occasionally. So I was in court over custody of my oldest and her mom's attorney was trying to paint me as a hypocrite for being an addict. I denied it all on the stand and he said, "Now James, I must remind you that you are under oath and by denying this you are committing perjury." I stared him dead in the face and said, "My name is Bill. James is my brother." Even the judge laughed at him and the only reason we didn't bring it up sooner, we knew he submitted it as evidence but had no idea why, was because I really wanted to know what he was up to with it all. When I practiced insurance defense, was handed a file to take over of a slip and fall. Guy tripped on a hose. Tore his ACL. The partner had taken the guy's depot already, so I read the transcript. I'm a Michigan football fan. Watched every game for 20 years. This guy testified he was the starting safety for a certain rival for certain years. Also that he graduated with a double major that doesn't exist at that school. I immediately knew this was false. Partner didn't understand. Dug deeper. Lied about so much stuff unrelated to the fall for no reason. Eventually found high school records from football injuries of head trauma. Knee injuries. Oh, and a slip and fall injury a few months after ours. He also testified he rehabbed an ACL surgery after 1 month. Motion for fraud on the court filed. Immediately settled. Not a lawyer. But I'm currently in a custody battle. Mother is saying I can't be trusted because I've been refusing to take our child to the therapist. The therapist testified I couldn't bring our child in because therapy must have both parents' consent. Mother has retracted consent. Very abbreviated. I was prosecuting a convenience store owner for luring a young girl who regularly came into the store back to a part of the store to grope, fondle and kiss her. Child enticement. It was the only section of the store without surveillance camera coverage. They were in the back room for about 2 minutes and 17 seconds. Put the timestamp on the videos. Of the many arguments the defense put on, one was there was no way there was enough time for anything to happen. In my rebuttal on closing, I asked the jury to imagine what could happen in the room in that amount of time. And I asked them to all close their eyes while I timed out 2 minutes and 17 seconds on my watch. In silence. After about 60 seconds, 2 of the jurors started crying. Knew it was going to be guilty right then. I asked them to all close their eyes while I timed out 2 minutes and 17 seconds on my watch. In silence. Holy, that was a clever idea. Not only emphasized how long the time period was but also let their imaginations run riot. I worked on a case involving defective processors. In discovery we got emails from the defendant's engineers that had worked on the processors. They were in an Asian country but the emails were in English because they were going to US executives. One of the more senior engineers basically laid out the exact defect we were suing over, explaining what the problem was and why it was their fault. And finishing with this is big problem. We ship crap to customer. Needless to say we hit them over the head with that in mediation. And they settled shortly after. Engineer being ignored. The sky is blue. I suck at haiku. My mom hit a guy on a bike with her car in a parking lot. She claimed he hit her. She also wanted to counter-sue the cyclist for scaring her. In her deposition she started every sentence with "when I hit him." One of my friends got hit by a car when crossing the street, in a crosswalk, on foot. This was back when we were in high school. The guy tried to sue him for the damages to his car. At one point the lawyer called up my friend's mom and asked for the son's insurance information and pictures of the damage of her son's car. She explained that my friend was on foot. And the lawyer just went silent for a bit. He said, "I need to speak with my client," and hung up. He called back a few minutes later and told her that she wouldn't be hearing about this again. Edited for clarity. When I compared the scanned copy of the deed provided by the other side's lawyers to the original my client eventually got around to providing. The scanned copy provided by the other side had a witness signature. The original did not. Obligatory. Not mine but my mom's story. She was fighting for custody on behalf of the father, trying to prove that the kids were living in subpar conditions with their drug addict mother in spite of the ample child support provided. It was a tough case because courts are so hesitant to pull kids away from their moms. Then the mom burst out that she had been feeding the kids cat food as proof that she wouldn't let them starve. Needless to say, the judge didn't take that as a good reason for the kids to stay with their mom. My client was accused of brutally murdering a dog. Cop testified that there was no testing of the blood. No body ever found. And admitted it could have, in fact, run away. The eyewitness said she could see the killing down the hallway from the dining room. Cop testified there was no hallway and the dining room was on a different level of the house than the killing supposedly took place. Then the person who was leading the lynch mob against my client around town for the last year testified that she had been in the apartment between the two visits by the cop to evaluate the scene. No body. A compromised crime scene. Witness who couldn't see anything. And admission that there was no proof the dog was dead. Closing argument lasted 3 seconds. Your Honor, I'm asking for an acquittal. Edit. My first award. Thanks. For those who asked, this was in Canada and received a fair bit of media attention prior to trial. Not a lawyer. But we had no evidence that the woman who slammed into my stopped car going 85 miles per hour was drunk. Until she indignantly admitted it on tape in her deposition. She busted into my deposition and demanded she go first because I was a lying bitch. She excitedly told my lawyer that the police report was wrong because it said she was coming from the movie theater when she was actually coming from her friend's bar. Did you have anything to drink at your friend's bar? Of course. How many drinks? I dunno. They just keep my glass full. Did you take any medicine that day? Methadone and low blood pressure medicine. I see. The cops had refused to breathalyze her at the scene because her husband was a firefighter that they knew personally. They told her to go home, sober up, and go to the hospital later. I heard the whole thing but had no proof until she handed it to me. They settled same day. At a restraining order trial, it was essentially my client's word versus his regarding arrest or assault. He did a good job dressing up and acting very appropriate during most of his testimony. But then he was asked a series of open-ended questions and he said something to the effect that she kept coming up on me with that PSSY, allegedly during a lecture, and as soon as he said it, a look came on his face and the judge's face and everyone knew the ruse of respectable young gentleman had failed. I won. I trapped a defendant pretty badly one time. He testified in a depo he had a green arrow for his left turn and that my client ran the red. Unfortunately for him, the additional turn lane arrow was installed 2 months after the wreck. Sued a former employer for $3,500 in unpaid wages. It was a slam dunk. Had a letter stating what my salary would be versus pay stubs that were less. So I didn't bother getting a lawyer to save on fees. Turns out the company thought they could try the same strategy. I show up to court and the manager of the local office is there with an affidavit from the CEO saying he's allowed to represent the company in court. The judge asks him, "Are you an attorney?" No. Just an employee. A company can't have pro se representation. Judge immediately ruled in my favor. Felt I'm fantastic. I was reviewing the transcript of an interview with a child. The child made incriminating statements against my client. At one point, when discussing the allegations, the child used an odd word, but I didn't think much of it. A few days later, I was watching a video of the child interacting with their grandmother, who hates my client, from about a week before that interview. The grandmother used the exact same odd word in the exact context the child later used it. At that moment, it became clear that child had been coached. It was the first real aha moment of my career. When I found a video on Facebook of the plaintiff squatting 300 pounds the month before his deposition. That was a good one. Oh, he was saying he couldn't work and had back injuries after a minor car accident. Edit. Just as a follow-up, I sent the video to his attorney afterward the deposition and the case immediately went away. He also adamantly denied being able to work out or doing any lifting during his deposition. It was a big lie. Also, I agree that this really sucks for the people with legitimate injuries. My client has been keeping her son away from the father because the father has a new child. She is concerned that her son will act violently towards the new child and she could be held liable. Judge, that's not even a defense. Not exactly a knew you would win moment. But I got a hidden shout out from a federal judge in a ruling that I consider to be one of the high points of my career. Here's what happened. Before a hearing for an emergency injunction against USDA, I was watching the hearing before mine, a trademark infringement case. At the end of that hearing, the judge accidentally used a pun and could not stop laughing. She was literally crying. I decided at that moment I was going to intentionally use a pun in my hearing. I dodosily accused USDA of engaging in a shell game by illegally diverting some federal funds to an egg industry trade group. The judge called me on it, but laughed heartily. My client won. The judge threatened to put the Secretary of Agriculture in jail. A major newspaper reporting on the case said the judge winced at my puns but agreed with my arguments. False. When the written ruling was issued, The last sentence said that an injunction was issued against USDA's use of the funds for any plans they may be hatching. Undeniable shout out. Not a lawyer, but was working as a paralegal for a law firm. We were defending a claim which had run into tens of thousands of pounds against our client, a holiday home, by a woman who had tripped over a speed bump while walking back to her caravan and damaged her knee. The fall was genuine. The question was whose fault this was. She claimed it was the holiday home's fault because she hadn't seen the speed bump due to low lighting, poor marking, etc. The claim had, outrageously, gone to months and made it to court. Going through the various questions to her, when our barrister asked how she knew the speed bump was poorly marked or something similar, her response, "Well, I remember thinking how it wasn't well marked when I was walking up to it." Needless to say, it was a short day in court after that point. I clerked for a judge and we had a low-level thief in our courtroom who had robbed one of his neighbor's houses in the winter in Colorado, and all the police had to do was follow the footsteps back to his house where he was hanging out with the stolen items and a small amount of drugs and a Thai handgun. Idiot. Edited for clarity. Not a lawyer, but I played one in small claims court. My lease had an exit clause that said if I fronted 2 months rent, they would work to lease my place and return anything unused. I checked with the office ahead of time. They ensured me there was a waiting list, so I gave them the 2 months and moved. They never returned a dime. I talked to the new tenant and confirmed they moved in a week later. In court, the judge was commenting on how he didn't see anything explicitly saying they would return any unused rent, even though that intent was stated to me a few times. Dumbo from the leasing office piped in with, "Your Honor, in almost every case we can return some money, but in this case we didn't have a tenant in the 2 months after he left." So she gave the case back to me and I presented the affidavit from the new tenant confirming the move-in date. Judge awarded me double what they owed. Turns out leasing office Dumbus 1 and 2 thought they could lie to me and return my excess rent money to themselves. I was sued for a car crash. While the plaintiff was on the stand, she began recounting the event and everyone realized it was a completely different crash. Different cars involved. Different time of day. Everything. Upon cross-examination, she revealed that she had 4 lawsuits running concurrently and couldn't keep them all straight. The jury foreman looked at me and rolled his eyes. Her eventual payout, paid by my insurance co., was a pittance. Less than the initial settlement offer before the whole thing went to trial. Her lawyer was shaking with anger when court adjourned. He was one of those "we don't get paid unless we get money for you guys." So he lost a lot of money on that one. Not a lawyer, but my girlfriend had a very minor nose to tail and a rookie cop who happened to drive by booked her on some massive charges and fines. She went to trial, and her lawyer tore apart the cop. In the report he filed, the officer ticked her ethnicity as African, she's white European, put the wrong date, the wrong street name, and didn't get the other witnesses' details. The prosecution and officer argued that she had signed the witness statement, so while a few things were accidentally filled out wrong, it reflected what happened. Her lawyer asked to the officer show the court her signature on the statement. He looked at it and said, "Oh, I must have forgot it." The prosecutor and a few police that went to the trial for some reason all let out audible groans. The judge adjourned for 10 minutes. The police still wanted to press on, but the judge threw it out immediately after recess and gave the prosecutor an earful for taking such a ridiculous case to trial. I had a ton of these when I used to do family law. Off the top of my head, my client's husband was alleging she had been high and nude in public. As I'm crossing him, I get him to admit that she was in fact changing out of her bathing suit at the beach and covered by a towel at all times. He says, "Well, she was naked under the towel." I come back with, "Just like you're naked under your clothes right now." Even the judge chuckled. Not a lawyer, was contesting a speeding ticket in front of the judge. It went like this: "Judge Mr. Crookie, you were given a ticket for doing 40 in a 30 area that's also a school zone on Turnpike Road. How do you plead?" Me, Your Honor. There is no school zone on Turnpike Road. The judge looks at the paper again. Then looks at the bailiff. There isn't a school zone there, is there? Bailiff: no, judge. Not to my recollection. Judge: Well, I guess you're free to go, Mr. Crookie. Have a nice night. In case you didn't know, if the officer writes up the ticket incorrectly, it has to be thrown out entirely. Also, I don't think the officer was trying to get me on extra charges on purpose. There was one of those signs at the top of a hill that warns of a bus stop over the crest of the hill. Think he just got confused. Your Honor, I have screenshots. The plaintiff was being deposed in the lawsuit she filed alleging sexual discrimination. She was claiming her boss had made some inappropriate innuendos and overtures. The defense attorney asked her if when the alleged statements or events took place. Was she shocked? No. Was she offended? No. Was she damaged in any way? No. So why exactly are we here? Well, honestly, I'd rather not be. Meanwhile, her attorney stared straight down, scribbling notes, doodling. We ended the deposition there and asked her attorney if this was going away now. We got a call later offering to settle for $1,000 and a letter of apology. My best guess is she was pressured by a friend or family to talk to an attorney and the lawyers ran with it without really talking to their client. My attorney had this moment in my initial consultation with him for my BWI charge. Yes. Boating. The sheriff's department conducted the field sobriety tests on the deck or their small vessel in a heavily traveled waterway rather than taking me to drier land. Charges were thrown immediately out after my attorney brought this to the attention of the DA. Edit. I should add, this attorney was a sheriff's deputy on Marine Patrol for 12 years prior to going to law school. I interviewed 3 different attorneys and he was the last. The other 2 quoted me $3.5K for the defense. He said that he would never tell a client a case is a slam dunk, but he charged $700 and said he would see the case through trial that it didn't get dismissed with no additional fee. It was thrown out by the end of the week. This document doesn't state our company's name, so we are not involved in the settlement. Me. Line 4 specifically lists the company as the defendant, and then the company is referenced to in lines 13, 27, and 33. I swear, if you read the documents, you're a better lawyer than 90% of the ones out there. I sort of have an opposite. He knew when he lost it one. When I was about 4 years old, I was ill one day and the only option my parents had to take care of me was for my dad to take me to work with him. My dad was an attorney and worked with the courthouse where he was arguing a case that day. My dad knew the judge and I was allowed to lay down on a bench during arguments from the 2 attorneys present, dad and opposing counsel. I was a pretty well-behaved kid, I guess, and was quiet, and just sort of laid down on the bench and stayed silent. I have vague memories of the incident, but nothing really defined. As my dad tells the story, the judge grew bored at one point, looked over to me, waved and gave me a smile, and commented on how well behaved I'd been during all of this. Dad said it was at that moment the opposing counsel knew he'd lost the argument and subsequently the case. Dad joked about needing to take me to court more often. I'm not a lawyer, but I took my old landlord to court when I was in college. They stole my security deposit over bull. They claimed I trashed the place, not knowing that I took pictures and video when I moved in and out. Their evidence was a VHS quality recording of going through a perfectly clean apartment in better condition than it was when I moved in. But then they opened up the top of the stove and found a single piece of elbow macaroni under it, holding it up triumphantly. That was the crux of their defense. The judge was not amused and I got all my money back plus my lawyer fees and the filing fee. She then fought against her own lawyer to avoid paying him. Asshole. Edit. Anytime you move into a place, take pictures, take video, make notes about any damage. When you move out, do the same thing along with noting any repairs you made. Pretty hard to argue against solid evidence. Protect yourself. I knew the cops beat up my client and framed him. They described a knife in his possession that caused them to fear for their safety. Oddly, they never seized it. We won the criminal case and filed a civil rights case. While deposing one, he described the knife in detail. No more than 3 minutes later, he slipped up and claimed his partner told him my guy had a knife. But he never saw it himself. I told him, "That's not what you just said," and saw him panic. His lawyer panicked too and asked to see me outside. When we got in the hallway, I withdrew my settlement demand, and the case settled for a substantially larger amount within 45 minutes.